necessary. This gives it the rigidity. The longer you make the horn, the more rigidity you lose in the control system. And never, for any reason, I don't care what anybody says, use 3/32 horns. This is the only thing I ever use. Now the trick here is to get the horn inserted into the trailing edge so that you have the middle of the 1/8 inch wire right on center here. You don't want to have the horn cocked this way, that way, or sitting too deep in the elevator, or sitting out on the end, or you'll make a very erratic, that'd be the best word, hinging. You want to have all the hinge pins and the center of the horn right along in one complete straight line, as if you could shoot a laser light right down there. And when you find a plane where the controls are really nice and free, that's usually one of the contributing factors. So I'm going to notch this out, and the idea is not to notch this any more than necessary, just enough to get the horn to sit in there. A zona saw is the easiest way to do this. Line it up, put some dots on there. This is how far out we have to go. And all you need to do, now we're going into a real soft piece of wood here, so I don't want to take any more out than I have to, just to get the horn to sit in here. Now zona saw, just get the notch, and I'd make it on the small side first and then pick away at it until you get exactly the amount you need. I'll do it just cleaning up the hole here, the little slot. Put some folded back paper and get a nice radius where that bushing is going to rest in a trailing edge. Again, you don't want to make this slot any longer or any wider than it has to be, just to get that. In other words, it doesn't have to go any further back than when the controls are in full deflection. When this seals up, this slot doesn't have to go any further forward. That's an important point. Keep the tail as rigid as possible and as light as possible. Now the last thing, to get a nice radius in that ditch that we've cut in there, I just take the wire itself, kind of press that right into the ditch. Gives you just the right shape into the soft wood. Now, just before I glue this in permanently, before I put that in, I want to put a couple drops of chain lube on that bushing, so that bushing won't have a, if a drop of CA gets in there or some dope or whatever, it won't stick. So I'll take this out, just put a drop of that PJ1 chain lube in there. Now, if you don't have a can of this in your inventory, this is a good. Go to any motorcycle supply place. This is spray-on chain lube. It goes on like water. It dries up into wheel bearing grease, and it pretty much lasts forever. It has a high capillary action. This is the best stuff I know of for lubricating controls, belt cranks, push rods, whatever, wheels in between maintenance on the plane. A drop or two of that will really save you a lot of work. Now another thing to remember too is you want to have, when you do put the final set on this horn, you want to have the bushings pressing as tight to the upright as possible. This way it keeps, there'll be no slop going side to side. Keep the bushings pressed right up to the upright as tight as possible. And make sure this is perfectly free. If it isn't, just keep working it in and pinching it with pliers until it's as free as possible. What I've done from time to time is forgotten to put the lubrication in there, and what can happen is a little drop of CA gets in there later on, and oh my God, the thing gets all frozen up and you're there making yourself crazy trying to get it to work. Now because this stuff is so capillary, it only takes one drop. And what you do, you let it sit for 4 or 5 minutes. It penetrates in there, especially around where the upright is. Whatever, I'll let this sit for a few minutes. Whatever it doesn't soak in, we just wipe it off with some alcohol and we'll be ready to glue this right in position. Work the bushings in real good. Because again, it's that thing of having perfect controls. Perfect controls don't just happen by accident. They happen by attention to all the little details. Hundreds of little places for friction, and every one of them nice and free. This is getting nice and free now. You just get the extra off. Give this 5 minutes before we clean it with alcohol, and we'll be ready to glue this in permanently. This is real important. I have absolutely no friction anywhere in that controls. More planes are ruined by having stiff controls. The last thing I do is make sure I have a nice tight fit down, that the horn goes far enough in. And I'll try to show this on the macro lens. One of the things you need to have is this little piece needs to have a little cutout so that the horn can slide far enough in. I may have to go and Dremel tool that out a little more. I don't have enough clearance on that myself here. Now the reasoning behind this is, if you make your own horns and this bend is too sharp, if you make this bend too sharp, it'll probably fracture the metal right here. It's very important to have a nice smooth radius right here, and not too sharp of a bend. Very important. Alright, there's all the final clearance in the horn. Took some bent up sandpaper and got the groove nice and smooth. We're ready to insert the horn in here. Tack glue it in place first with a drop or two of thick CA, just to make sure the elevators fit on and everything before you put the permanent glue and put the little braces in here. Now, just to mention one of the things you probably don't want to do, and I've done this before, is I've been in a rush to get this done. Put the horn in here, hit it with thin CA. The thin CA went down into the foam and ate up a lot of the foam in this area. So one of two things here: either use thick CA or epoxy. In this case, I'll just use a few drops of thick CA. I don't want this going down all over the place. This is just anyway to tack it in position more than anything else. The thin CA is too capillary. It'll just run inside and make a mess on you. And of course, make sure it's parallel to the center line. Let that just kick off. Give that a minute or so to kick off. Now, before we make this permanent, I want to slip the elevators on, make sure a couple of our alignments are totally correct, because if they aren't, I can correct them right now. I want to make sure, number one, that I don't have the elevators doing this, pitched back or pitched forward, and that they line up with the center line. And if they don't, I can get 2 pair of pliers and just tweak the horn just a little bit, because I don't have the horn permanently in there yet. You can see this looks decent. Not great. This one is out just a little bit, which means I'll pull this off. Get all your alignment done right now. It's a lot easier now than later. Just give that a little bend, because we're going to be putting these elevators on and off 1,000 times by the time we're actually finished here. All right, that looks a little better. Now, with all that zeroed in, the last thing you want to do is hold the elevators up before we put this horn on permanently. Get both of the hinges at the end and sight down, and make sure the elevators are in straight alignment. You don't have one a little bit down or a little bit up, because it's a lot easier to tweak the horn now than later. Now, even if the elevators, and they almost never come out exactly perfect, for the simple reason the tubing in the elevator horn could be just a little bit off, but it's real easy to tweak them this way than it is after you glue them on permanently. Now, I know a lot of this stuff seems like it takes so long and you just want to get on with building, but it really pays off in the final analysis. There you go. First time you pull out of a wing over and the plane just sits there flat as a pancake, but you'll be so glad you did all these little alignments. All the center lines, all the alignments, all the tweaking, all pays off at one time. Now, what I'm doing very carefully is extending this slot just far enough so that what's going to happen is I can get my full deflection and close up the hinge line where it's nice and sealed at full deflection. And I don't want to go even a couple thousandths further than I have to, because this is really a high stress area. That closes up the hinge line real nice. In fact, I think I'll leave that. And once all the alignments are in and you have this set, then it's time we'll permanently install the horn. Now this is still just tack glued in here, but we'll permanently install it, put some little braces in here, and then we're pretty much permanently committed to this control system. Now I'm taking a piece of soft 1/4 inch here, and I just want to measure this up to make my little brace. Just to contain the horn, it'll lock it in. These are the little blocks. I just roughed this one out. This has the little gap for the horn. Notice which way the grain goes. If the grain goes the other way, they'll be almost useless. We'll glue these in position and then trim off all the extra weight around them. This will be our little horn containment blocks. This one I haven't cut the groove in yet, of course. Now it's important, if you want to get a nice tight fit around the back of the horn, I've glued this on with thick CA, because I don't want to have any chance the thin CA is going to run in here and grease up, gook up the controls. I'll let that harden up. I'll cut the groove in the other block, get the other block on there, and then I'll trim them all down. And what I'll do is get a brand new X-Acto and trim this all down. This is what it looks like before trimming. Just trying to blend this all in nice. When I'm all done, I'll give this a little shot with thin CA, just to harden up the wood. Now I want to make sure I got the sandpaper on a roller, get a nice smooth cut for where that joins, where the horn's going to join. And again, every step of the way, check to make sure it's nice and smooth. Alright, the next thing we want to do is cut the hinge pockets. Now the reason we couldn't cut the hinge pockets in the back of the stab, of course, is we didn't know the exact alignment. The horn establishes the alignment before you cut the hinge pockets. Now I can just line everything up, mark where my hinge pockets are going to be. I'll cut them the same way I did with the Dremel tool with a parting wheel. I did a test fit, pressed in all the hinges. What I'm going to do now is cut up the tip pieces and get the tip pieces roughed out. Now one of the things I always think is important is that the tips of the wing have to match the tips of the tail. One of the things I can do, I have a piece of scrap top block here, really. Just a piece of scrap. I can find the softest spot in this. Find the softest spot, and I'll trace out my wingtip airfoil on here and cut it out with the Dremel saw. Good place to use up. This is a nice soft piece. Okay, I got all the blocks roughed out in this dimension. Now what I want to do is tack glue them all in position and then cut my tip shape in. Alright, I'm just going to let that 5-minute epoxy set up. Then I can pull off the tape and start shaping up the tips. Now what I've done is I've set, and this is really important, I'm working off the center line here of the stab. A lot of people don't bother doing this and it causes trim problems. I measured out on both ends, including the tip block, to get the total span and marked it real accurately. Then with the tip span marked, I put a 90-degree line going up and down the tip. Then I went down and got the angle of the tip block that I want, and again measured very accurately. Now the reason is you want to have, from the working off the center of the stab, you want to have both right to the end of the tip exactly even, and you want to have the two elevators and the two stab halves a complete mirror image. This is worth putting this little extra time in to do this. Remember, what we're just looking for is an exact, you see I put the 90-degree mark down here, and that gives me the total span. The span will be exactly even, referencing off of that center line. Exactly even. Then I want to have my angles exactly even, so I've taken this measurement here and the measurement off the other side, make sure they're exactly equal. Okay, I got all the extra little tip blocks, get rid of them. In fact, what I can do with these, I can save these for the number 2 plane. Since the tail will be exactly the same, I'm just going to put a piece of tape around these and save them for the next tail. The first thing I like to do is get the blocks even with the trailing and leading edges. Same thing on the elevators. Get the first thing, the tips, all those hinge lines parallel before I carve the block. Then lay this in position and get a center line on it before I carve it. Now what's real handy here is to have the long T-block. Really gets you that nice straight edge. And one of the reasons a lot of people spend more time making tips than they should, especially wing tips, is they don't do it in a methodical order. Get these edges first, then get a center line, then do the carving. If you try it any other way, it just takes extra time. Now you see I've got these perfect edges. The big sanding block makes it bigger, makes it easier. The bigger the sanding block, the better it'll be, and the quicker you can go through this. Now you can just extend your center lines right out onto the tips. Another alternate way to do this is to take some 1/8" tape and just wrap the tape around the edges. That's a nice way to do it too. And then at the very end, take the tape off and do the final radius. Now with the center line on there, of course I'll just repeat it 4 extra times off camera. Get this all center lined up, and then I can start putting in my curve for the tip shape. And I might even put a little piece of tape along here just so I can really get a nice radius edge without making this. You don't want to make this balsa in here real thin. You want to do all the carving actually in the block, none on the foam. But you only have a very thin piece of sheeting here after we're done sanding it. Now when you do the elevators, you want to carry that pointed line from the front, and then you want to get these edges pretty much the same angle. In fact, you want to get them exactly the same angle. Big sanding block, very handy to have. Now that I get all those shapes sanded in, I'm ready to do the radius in. And obviously then when I'm all finished doing the radius, and I'll put the pieces together like this with the hinges in them and do the final contour so I have a really blended, one blends right into the other. Now I hope by seeing how the steps go in making a stab, it'll save you some time, obviously some energy too. The horn sets up the hinge pockets, the hinges, everything in place, and don't do the tips. Now what I've seen guys do is carve the elevators in this, put the tips on, and then try to make a horn fit. Man, that's ass backwards stuff. Get the horn in, do it in the sequence that you see. If nothing else, do it in the sequence you see it, because you know you can build it then in 1 or 2 days. It's not going to be a big deal to run through this. When you do extra steps and do them out of sequence, you just make a lot of work for yourself for nothing. Now we're going to have to head out to the rock pile. Come back and maybe I'll get this carving done tonight. I hope I can get this carving done tonight anyway. Tonight I want to get these carved up. I hope I can get this carved up. By the way, Richard Neal sent in some tape from down his way, a contest down in New Mexico. I'm just trying to check it out here. Anybody wants copies of any of these other tapes, give me a buzz, or give Richard Neal a buzz, or send me some blank tapes or whatever, or send me your firstborn, who cares. Anyway, I like to get a piece of tape around the wood because the wood out here gets very thin as you start to carve it. A brand new number 26 blade is a must up here before we start the rounding procedure. And of course we're working off the center line. We're just going to start working. Take small chunks off at a time. In fact, we'll do most of this with the animation feature just to save some time so this doesn't run into a big thing. This shouldn't be more than a half hour, maybe an hour's worth of work carving these tips up. Blue wall gas. Wall gas. Special thanks to Richard. Gas. Now we're coming up on the end of all this carving individual pieces. What I'd really like to do now is get the elevators assembled in and then just do a final shaping here. I gotta tell you, I really have enjoyed watching old Lou Wallgast flying here in Wallgast's 60 powered ship. Back in the days when Lou and I were cool guys, young guys, frivolous guys. What were we anyway? I don't know. Anyway, I put the whole tail together now in one piece, and now I can just do a final sanding, and this will be all I get to do tonight. Getting a little tired here. I can dress these edges off and make sure I have them perfect. And this will pretty much be ready for, well... One of the things I wanted to try is I want to try to make a piece of this fillet here, pre-make it. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it or not. I saved the piece that came out of there with that in mind. But again, we'll try that. We haven't done that since the arowana, but we'll see if that's going to be a feasible way of doing this. Alright, I guess I'll just off camera dust this all off with 400. And that's it for tonight. No, I just want to look over this. The final thing I did it off camera, was I rounded off the stab tips and rounded off the front of the rudder. Try to get the same general look. You know, I'm always trying to make things match like they belong. They look like they belong anyway. And we'll do all the final radius and on the rudder and on here when we get the plane assembled into one piece. But for now, that's certainly close enough. Okay, that's about, well, we want to give a try to doing that stab fillet off the plane a la arowana, but we'll give that a try tomorrow or the next day, just to see if we can do it that way and save any time or weight. That'll be the next thing we give this a try on. Now I haven't really done this since I built the arowana. On the arowana, what I did is I took the little piece that we cut off of the elevators here, which of course is a lot lighter than a piece of balsa wood, and I made up the fillet before I actually put the tail in the plane. Now there was two reasons for doing this, and this is something you might want to consider doing. The two reasons are because we have the rave rudder linkage and we have the ball link on here already. What happens is it gets real difficult once this is in the plane, once we actually have this in the plane, to carve that little piece of fillet on both sides with a piece of balsa wood. At least for me anyway, it seems like it's an incredible job. It takes an awful long time. Well, while we have it out in the open here, it's a lot easier to carve this up. Now what I did, I just tack glued on the leading edge piece, put a little half moon on with the Dremel tool, and you can do this. I'm only going to put this half on with foam. The other side will be hollow so that there'll be room for the rod to go out. assuming that you're using a ray brother linkage. Okay, and then this will get attached in, and I'll fill this in so that what happens is when I drop this right in the plane, this will help align neutral too. Because what I can do is align this up ahead of time, get it in perfect neutral, put the fillet in perfect neutral. Then when I drop this into the fuselage top, well, I'm referencing off a 7.5 or 7-inch piece of wood instead of a 3-inch. There's a lot more chance I'll get it on right on the money. So this might, I haven't done it yet. I'm going to try to do this and I'll share with you how I'm doing it. But it might be something on future models I'll want to do all the time. Because we already have this little piece, and it's much lighter than balsa wood, and it also has all the cuts in it. You just need to relieve it for the horn, get a nice smooth fit up here, put the trailing edge on, and you have half the fillet. Then I'm going to take a piece of sheeting on the other side so that the whole bottom will be open. And then I can sand this fillet, tissue it, get it all done before I actually even put it in the plane. If it doesn't work out, hey, I'll share that with you too. There's no ego trip here. We're just trying this. I haven't done this, let's see, arowana since about the early 80s. So let's see if this works. Now what I needed to do is I wanted to get the grain going front to back on here, and I wanted to build up the thickness a little bit. It just didn't blend in perfectly here. So I'm building this up with an extra piece of 45 thousandths. I'll put another piece on the bottom. You can see I have the grain going front to back. And what that'll allow me to do is when I actually glue this on, I can blend that right in. And that'll allow me a little extra room in the back that I can put marry it right up with the elevators. I only have to do one side of this. The other side I'll just use a piece of solid wood because the whole bottom is going to be hollow. But anyway, if you can follow this step by step, this may be a way, no matter what plane, even if you're building like Joe Ortiz is building up a, you know, a Rabe Mustang or whatever, or Borelli's building a Killer Bee, who knows. Whatever plane you have, this is one alternate way you can do to fill it. And like I said, I haven't done this since the arowana, so I'm kind of feeling my way through this, but once I get all the pieces together, it's another way you can do it. Alright, I have both sides of this glued on now. There's just to build up a little thickness now. Maybe you will or won't have to add some thickness depending, you know, I guess on the individual model. But what I'm doing, and I was trying to show this, as soon as you get this off, get the edges nice and straight. The dust will help kick off the CA. I'm just going to take a little piece of scrap and fill in a little gap in the back, and that'll take care of that piece. And I got the piece relieved for the horn, of course. It's moving, actually it's going faster than I thought it would. Now the next step is I want to trim this off even with the elevator, and I want to get this taper exactly, and I can just eyeball this, just get some of this. It's a little too thick in the back, but it's okay up here. Get a little bit of this done by hand with a block. I just want to trim this off roughly even. I'll do the rest with a block, get this piece off, and I just trying to get this final taper in here to match. And what you have to do is just block sand a little bit and then go up and look and see that you have a nice fit. I know I have to take almost all the material off the bottom and almost none up here. Work off a glass table, work off a sanding block. Now because it's foam I can't use CA, but I took a piece of 64th plywood. You notice how I made this nice little edge so it seals out the oil from getting in by the horn. And this is just a rough fit. Now I'll get up there and I'll get this exactly in neutral by filing away at the edge of the plywood. Get this really in neutral and do the final sanding in and get the back edge nice. Now what it does, once this is, if you do it this way, hey, you know, it takes maybe a half hour, an hour to make this piece up, but boy, once you have the plane together, you drop the tail in and you're done. This will just save a lot of time. Actually, this is a lot easier in my book than doing it. I don't know why I didn't do this many times before. Definitely saving some time here. Now, I just thought it would be worth taking a minute here to explain what I'm trying to accomplish, since we haven't done this on the video before. Here's the back of our fuse. Let's just say the fuse is going to end like this. We're going to wind up with something similar to that. Well, here's what happens. When you go to line up a tail, usually you make this little cut. And what you have is this dimension here is usually about 3.5 inches. So with this on center, it's real easy to get a 3.5 inch. If you're out by a 1/16 of an inch here in a span of 3.5 inches, you've got a tremendous problem. This tail is either going down, going up, or in some way you've lost the center line. Now, what happens is, because we're going to have our fillet attached, this is all going to be one piece, and we'll tape it in position. What happens now is we have a 7-inch, roughly 7-inch piece. Now if we were off even a 1/16 of an inch, it wouldn't really matter that much, because we've cut in half the amount of error. So, and of course if we get it totally even better. Now, what adds to this is the fact that we're going to have some slop in the elevators. Now what happens when you have slop in the elevators, you don't want to have the slop all up or the slop all down. You want the slop right in the middle. So when it's inverted, you have this amount of slop. When it's right side up, you have this amount of slop. What this does, this is going to allow us, hopefully, because we'll put the press, in other words, the way we're going to do this, let me explain. Up at the flap horn, we're going to have the slop built in at the flap horn. And we're going to have this bushing, a bushing in here, a little piece of fuel tank tubing that'll keep this in neutral. As this is keeping this in neutral, and we've dropped this right down in position, we can get this right on the money, so it's dead nuts even. Then what we'll do is take this little bushing out, before we finalize everything, glue the top block on, we'll take this little bushing here out, and when this is neutral, we'll have half of the amount up and half of the amount down. This is a real critical thing, and this has worked well on every plane I've made. And you can go back and look at the record. All the planes that have the neutral set this way and have the slop bushing up at the flap horn. Now, it used to be years ago, people used to put the slop bushing at the back. Not so good. You get flappy elevators and all kind of stuff. I like having it up at the flap horn. Take that bushing out. After you get all done here and you're all finished, everything's in neutral, before you solder this permanently, take that bushing out and you'll have half up and half down. Now, if you decide you don't want any slop in here, leave the extra bushing in. And you'll wind up with a horn that has an 1/8 inch bushing, and inside of that you'll have a piece of fuel tank tubing, and inside of fuel tank tubing you'll have the wire coming out. So you'll have a double bushing, there's no problem. Another advantage of doing it this way is, after you've finished the plane and you say, gee, it's got too much slop, because as you add slop, you reduce the total elevator travel. Slop reduces the elevator travel to a certain amount. You lose a few degrees of elevator travel every time you put in slop. So keep in mind, this is all stuff that Big Jim has worked out with Mike and with me and with other people that have gone and done this before. What we're really looking for is the amount of slop that we've come to accept as a traditional amount, and that's a 3/32 rod in an 1/8 inch hole bushing at the flap horn. And what we'd like to have then is have it completely neutral, the same amount up, the same amount down, and the tail set in completely neutral. And if you get this whole concept in your mind, this is the heart and soul of getting a plane to fly level. And you notice some planes, you watch them fly inverted and it's they can't hold neutral to save their life. Well, and some planes pull out of the wing over and bang, and they lock right in. Well, this is the heart and soul of what's happening. You're not going to really read about this in stunt news or flying models. There's not a lot of people actually in the whole world that really have a full understanding of this, unless you've built 30, 40, 50 airplanes and tried various combinations of this. Now, I was talking to Paul Walker at the Nats this year, and I grabbed his plane. I wanted to see how much slop. He says he has less slop than I do, but when I grabbed his plane, he seemed like he had about the same amount I did. So he may have already figured this out. I know other people. Bob Gialdini has even written about this. Other people that really know their stuff have come up to this exact conclusion. So save yourself all the aggravation, save making the hatches in the planes, and save having the tail in a little crooked. This way that we're showing right now is a good way to set neutral real well on the first shot. Now, one final point. A lot of people have trouble figuring out how to hold the elevators in neutral. Let's just exaggerate this. And maybe because you don't have good eyes like I do, you want a method that's better than just eyeballing it. Okay, well here's a really good way of, when we actually come to installing this, we'll tape these into neutral. A good way of figuring out where neutral is. You're going to have a center line, hopefully, on this whole deal. You'll have a center line going around the front and back. If you want to find dead neutral on here, take a tape measure. You know, the kind of tape measure that a woman would use to, you know, fit dresses. Put a pin in the front here. Put a pin. Let's simulate the pin. And measure around here. Put a pin in the back where you think neutral is. And now measure between the pins. When this distance is exactly the same as this distance, this also works, by the way, if you ever wanted to neutralize flaps. When those two pins are equal, and you'll find that even a 1/64 of an inch up or down, you know, usually a dressmaker's thing won't stretch too much. Don't put a lot of tension on it. You can even do it with a string. If you take a piece of string, tie a knot around here or just loop it around. Now take that string and go up here, mark it with a dot of ink, bring it around this way, wrap it around. Now you've got, when the dots line up, you know you've got neutral. Now what I do is I take, once you know you have neutral, take some masking tape, put some on the top, masking tape on the bottom, put a little bit of tension. Now if it goes out of neutral this way, you know you can put an extra piece of tape this way. If it goes out of neutral that way, you can put an extra piece of tape. Just like when we put the glass on the wing, by putting some tension on that, you can stretch it in the direction you have to. You keep these pins neutral. You will have exactly neutral. You drop that down into the fuse side so that pretty much the two pins are going to line up with the top of the fuse side, or whatever you've determined. If you're using a higher tail, a lower tail, you've got a center line on here. When you could line those pins up with the center line, you're going to have a perfect neutral. And this is worth thinking about and worth doing. Because you go look at planes flying on a field, and some of them, they just fly inverted. They fly to squares, dead flat. 90% of it is in lining up that tail and at the same time getting the right amount of slop. It's not just a simple matter of building a tight control system with no binds in it. It also needs the right amount of slop in the elevators to fly right. Now I got this hopefully taped in neutral, checked it.